In this video, we'll solve problem 6 from the export grade tuna demand and supply worksheet that we handed out in class. That worksheet is also available on your Sakai website under resources. So as you can see, I've already drawn the demand and supply curves from the initial data. For example, I've plotted at a $1 price the quantity demanded of 180,000. And I've also plotted at a $4 price the quantity demanded of 60,000, which is here. And likewise, for the supply curve, at a $1 price, there are 60,000 pounds per week supplied, that value. And at a $4 price, I've plotted the 180,000 pounds here. So having plotted those initial data, I'm ready to get started on constructing the supply curve after the wage increase. So as we know, an increase in wages shifts the supply curve back. And here we know specifically that it's going to shift the supply curve for export grade tuna back by 40,000 pounds per week. So I'll draw this in green so we can highlight it. Basically, to do that, at each price I'm going to subtract 40,000 pounds from the initial quantity supplied. So at a $1 price, I originally had 60,000 pounds per week supplied. Now I'll have 60 minus 40, or 20,000 pounds per week supplied. Likewise, at a $1.50, formerly 80,000 pounds supplied, now 40,000 pounds supplied. At a $2 price, 60,000 pounds. At a $2.50 price, 120 minus 40 is 80,000 pounds, and so forth. So now I have the data for my supply curve, but I only have to plot 2 points to make a straight line supply curve. So I'll probably stick with my $1 price and plot the quantity supplied now not at 60 but at 20,000. So here's 60, here's 20. That would subtract 40,000 pounds per week at that $1 price. At the $4 price, formerly 180,000 pounds per week, now 140,000 pounds per week. So about there. And I will connect those two dots with a linear supply curve. We always label those S1, and we like to tell the story as to why that curve shifted, so I'll put increase wages here. And I will straighten that curve as well. And there's my supply curve. Now part A, we're to show in the diagram the new equilibrium price and quantity. And so here's the equilibrium price, of course, the intersection of the blue original demand curve with the new supply curve. And that's a price, call it P star 1, of $3. Corresponding quantity exchanged is 100,000. So that's my new price and quantity in the equilibrium. In order to answer part B, how do consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the total gains from exchange change after the increase in wages, it'll be handy for me to make sure that my curves are stretched out to the vertical axis, the price axis there, so I'll do that. And it also is going to be required that I mark the old equilibrium price and quantity, so I'll do that as well. In the old situation, I was here with 120,000 units exchanged at a price of $2.50. Call that P star 0 equals 250. So let's first identify the change in consumer surplus. Now notice it says that we want the change here. So follow the wording. How do they change after the increase in wages? We're not trying to mark the total consumer surplus in the new situation, but the actual change in consumer surplus. That turns out to be relatively easy. We can simply shade this area. Of course, consumer surplus is the excess of the maximum willingness to pay of consumers over and above the price they actually pay. When the equilibrium price goes up, as it has here, they lose a piece of their consumer surplus, and we will shade that in as this area here. And got to make sure that we include this piece here, which represents the change in quantity. So that is the lost consumer surplus. No need to calculate it, although you could. The blue area is lost consumer surplus. The producer surplus change is a little bit more difficult, but easy to see if we understand what producer surplus is. So let's review. Producer surplus is the excess of the market price over and above the opportunity cost of supplying the good. So it's basically the area under the market price down to the supply curve, which in the case when we had the red supply curve was this area here, which I'll mark with letters because it'll be a little bit easier here. So it was the area A, B, C, O. So A, B, C, O was the original, from which of course we've lost a slice of that, represented by the supply curve shifting back to the green supply curve. So I'm going to mark this as point D, and it'll be B, C, O, D, and then I need this to be marked as well, which will be point E. So the lost producer surplus equals area B, C, O, D, E. But producers also gain some of the former consumer surplus when the price increases. And that sliver would be AE, call this F, and this point G. So there's a gained producer surplus of AEFG. And if we were to characterize the new producer surplus, it would be, of course, area DGF. DGF. Finally, how do the total gains from exchange change after the increase in wages? Well, that's just the amount by which the wedge has declined. So the original gains from exchange were simply from this point here at $5 out to point B and down to C. That was the wedge. Now the wedge is from that same point down to F and then down to D. So the loss, of course, is F, B, C, O, D. Lost total gains equal F, B, C, O, D. And that concludes the solution to problem 6 on the export grade tuna demand and supply problem. See you in class.